So I thought I would show how cluttered all the wiring had become. And as you can see, it's a mess. So hopefully this fuse panel is going to clear up a lot of that. We'll see in the next photo. So here's the final result. The dash is definitely cleaned up a lot. I do have one block left. This is for the dimmer light controls for anything that needs to be dimmed, like the gauges. So they all tie into this one connector that hides in the back. But I got rid of all of that mess that was in there. And I now got all that attached to the console fuse panel that I built. So before I put everything back together, I wanted to show how my fuse console panel came out. And this is where it'll normally sit. It'll be back behind all this panel. I'll have a cover over it so it doesn't get any shorts. I haven't laid the fuses yet, but essentially if I need to get at any of the connections for all my accessories, anything I have plumbed into here, all I have to do is pull this panel out. I've got plenty of slack to lay it on the floor and get in and work on it. Now what I've done is I brought in an 8-gauge cable from the battery on the 40 amp circuit for positive and ground, and then I've also taken an 8-gauge cable and run it back to the front of the console. So there's another ground loop in the car, and I've also got the 0-gauge cable that runs to the frame and then to the front of the car. So I've got plenty of battery grounds. The layout on the panel is grounds here, and the entire top row is ground. So I have all these connections that I can bring my grounds into, and I've doubled up some of them. A lot of grounds I found. I didn't think I actually had that many to do. But all the circuits are wired, are labeled. Like this is the controller for the O2 sensor, the wideband sensor. And I've got them all on schematics. So if I need to find this stuff, it's very quick to find now and being labeled. I've color coded the terminals, so all the blacks are grounds. And then the battery cable comes in for the battery circuit. And all these will be fused for my battery outlets. And again, everything's labeled and schematic, red color code. I've done an accessory on this side. These are not fused, so they come in. And then the ignition, actually there's a relay under here. One of the things that gives me a real advantage is this, as I said before, is an 88 Daytona wiring harness. And being that it's a laser, I don't have pop-up headlights. So I get to use the concealed headlight harness to do all kinds of circuits. If I need a quick dash connection to power something, this blue wire is powering the ignition circuit down on my fuse panel. That signal will activate this relay and engage this fuse panel for the bottom. So this entire bottom row is open for ignition circuits. And there's other circuits that need to be installed on here, but you can see it's all nice and cleaned up, easily identifiable through all the labels, and the panel is easy to move around. So if I've got to work on it, I can bring it over to the side, get it everything, and then tuck it back up underneath when I'm done with it. So hopefully the days of confusing wiring are gone. It's taken me 2 weeks to convert that mess of wires into something that's more realistic to work with. And if I had gotten this car and had to troubleshoot all those wires, it would have been a nightmare. So I'm not happy about the time I lost, but I'm very happy with the outcome. Yeah, I'd like to clean up some of this, but you have to be realistic in what you can clean up and what you can't. But like I say, at least everything is labeled I've gotten rid of the extra relays. I had relays for the fuel pump, for the water pump, and also for the radio. I kept the one for the radio. That's still here, but that's a factory relay that was just laying behind there. So that's the only one that was still loose. All the other relays are now up in the power distribution center under the hood. So another circuit that I need is a wire for the wideband oxygen gauge, so air-fuel ratio gauge. So I need a circuit that when I turn the headlights on, it activates the gauge, and I can't use a dimmer circuit. It has to be full voltage all the time. So when you turn the headlights on, you want it to engage. Well, it turns out that this second terminal, which is right here on the circuit, I can use that for the wideband, because that's when I pull the headlights on, I get 12 volts all the time. So having that connector really bails me out if I need extra activation circuits. I don't have to go hunting all over for it. I've got them right here in the gauge, in the dash, that I can grab for anything I want. Like that'll go into this yellow wire for the wideband gauge. So all I have to do is get that up there to that connector. Just one of the hidden benefits that I didn't plan on, but it worked out well. So I've actually gone into the relays for the water pump and the ASD relay that runs the fuel pump. So instead of having separate circuits to run all that, I just ran a wiring harness up here, and I put that into my main harness that comes to the power distribution center. So now when I need to run the fuel pump, I'm actually turning on the ASD relay just like the factory would, but now I'm overriding it with a switch inside. And the water pump is being controlled by the SMEC and by the electric water pump, the Davies-Craig controller, are both controlling this through these wires. So it's getting a ground signal when it needs to trigger. Now I did find with the fuel pump from the SMEC, after a lot of head scratching, that the circuit to turn this fuel pump on ran, well, the terminals for it are not well labeled in the SMEC input outputs. So this is how I've converted it to look like something more logical to understand. And I'm sending in a positive and a negative. So even if the SMEC is not working and I throw my fuel pump switch, it'll actually send a positive and a negative to run this relay regardless of whether the SMEC is operational or not. So that was one bonus I got out of this. But I did find that I had the polarity backwards in my logic diagrams before I started. And you can see on this relay that the way it's wired from the factory schematic is backwards, but most relays don't have the diode inside, so it's not going to be an issue. These relays don't have it, so the diode is non-functional. So that's where I'm standing. A lot of cleanup. I did find one other thing too, is the radiator fan, electric fan. I always thought that was a high draw current. I was actually able to run this on only 10 amps with no problem. So I've changed my fuse in the power distribution center to a 20, figuring that's double what I need. But I did find that when I manually ran that through a 10 amp circuit, it ran fine. It would blow on a 5 amp, but it ran fine on a 10 amp. So a lot of figuring things out, but I'm making sense of it now. And I actually spent a full day just figuring out the two power and ground wires for the ASD circuit, which one went to where on the SMEC. And as I say, the diode and the schematic threw me off because the power is actually backwards to what it would normally be. So this shows more of a finished how it's going to look. I've got the carpet cut away behind the dash, so if I have to access it, I just have to get behind it, pull the panel out and work on it. Not perfect, but a lot more convenient than what I had, and these things make sense now. This goes down as one of those things I learned on the internet projects. You ever trying to solder wires together or work with them and you need a third hand? This is a simple clip setup, or a little vise setup basically. Take a couple alligator clips, heavy gauge wire, probably 14 gauge household wire, just the ground wire, and insert it in. Crimp it. You can use a crimping tool or put it in the vise. You want to make that loop as small as you can, so just get it in the vise and crush it until it's flat, and put it in. Now when you need to solder a wire or hold something together, just clip one end, clip the other end, and if I was soldering that, I just put them together and solder. So, pretty simple way of doing it.